This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers, that is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 644, entitled The Value of a Good Masculist Harangue to a Mixed Audience. Description. The femafia, that's feminist media mafia, which blocks publication of masculist ideas in the media, is very strong and a source of great frustration and hatred on the part of biconscious masculists. There's no meeting of minds between monoconscious feminists and biconscious masculists. The monoconscious feminists interpret masculist criticism of women as just more misogyny and resist it, remaining closed-minded to masculist critique. To biconscious masculists, this closed-mindedness is interpreted as sexist, hypocritical bigotry and is hated. This flyer advocates that biconscious masculists use masculist harangues in mixed audiences and mixed groups to force monoconscious feminists to open their minds to biconscious masculist ideas, or risk losing their boyfriends, whom the masculists target, teaching these male feminist boyfriends masculism, so that they become biconscious, who do not tolerate the hypocrisy of monoconscious feminists and dump them. Once this has happened millions of times, millions of monoconscious feminists will convert themselves to biconsciousness, and the femafia will disappear, no longer tolerated by both sexes. Now the flyer itself. The value of a good masculist harangue to a mixed audience, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. I'm becoming increasingly emotionally aware just how strong what I call the femafia influence is on society. The femafia is the feminist media mafia, which blocks publication of masculist ideas, so that the masculist movement is having a hard time spreading its ideas to the to the masses, thus delaying the liberation of men from the horrible, decades-lasting gender crimes that women commit against men. The most notorious example of this femafia blocking of masculist ideas was by Susan Wojcicki, the former CEO of YouTube, who promoted feminist channels and deleted, in capital letters, masculist channels, thus making her the most hated woman in the manosphere for her sexist, hypocritical bigotry. 5 years ago, when I returned to Australia, I mentioned to a female staff member of the old college I went to in the 60s that besides being a retired computer science professor, that I was a masculist. She gave me a really sour look. As a biconscious masculist, that sour look spoke volumes to me, illustrating how brainwashed feminists are into the idea that gender oppression is a one-way street, and that any masculist criticism of women is just more misogyny and hence to be resisted by feminists. To a biconscious masculist, this common attitude of monoconscious feminists, in brackets, who, by definition, have only had their feminist consciousness raised in the context of gender politics, close brackets, merely shows the ignorance of these feminists regarding how women oppress men. Virtually all feminists and society as a whole at the time of writing, that's November 2023, are monoconscious. Feminism is a deeply misandrist, gynocentric ideology that teaches women nothing, capital letters, about how women oppress men, and in fact far worse than vice versa. After returning from a month's trip to Cambridge and Paris, I have been trying to persuade Cambridge University student clubs to publish masculist essays to educate their student members into masculist ideas, but no one is biting. This is awfully frustrating for me. A month ago, from the time of writing, I got the email address of a journalist who works for the most famous newspaper in the world, Le Monde, which aims at France's intellectuals, as does France's famous radio program, France Culture. I mentioned to this journalist that I was a masculist, and again I got a rather negative look from him, since he too was probably a male feminist and utterly ignorant of masculist ideas, who knows nothing about the masculist case, and like most female feminists, has been brainwashed into the idea that any masculist criticism of women is just more male misogyny and hence is to be rejected. To a biconscious masculist, this rouses enormous frustration, since such a masculist is all too aware how women oppress men, and far worse than vice versa, with women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, women's forced fathering, and other horrible, decades-lasting gender crimes that women commit against men that definitely deserve to be criticised, and strongly criticised. It's only ignorance of masculist ideas that is blocking these monoconscious feminists and male feminists from accepting the idea that gender oppression is very much a two-way street, and that in reality women oppress men worse. While in Cambridge, I had lunch with the director of the Centre for the Future of Intelligence at Cambridge University, who said he would talk to his subgroup that concerns itself with the threat to humanity of the rise of massively intelligent machines, which is one of my strong interests, given that my professorial specialty was artificial brains. The idea was that he would arrange for me to give a talk to this group. I sent him the video of my interview by Brian Rose of London Real fame, which lasted 2 hours. The first 90 minutes were on the issue of species dominance, that is, humans versus machines. And the last 30 minutes were on masculism. I did not hear back from him. My girlfriend told me that in her opinion it was because of my masculist views that he did not reply, so he too may be a male feminist. In fact, he has co-edited a book on AI, that's artificial intelligence, and gender. So I suppose my girlfriend is right. He too almost certainly has never heard of masculist ideas, so he too is monoconscious, who has been brainwashed by feminism, monoconscious feminism, that gender oppression is a one-way street, and that any masculist criticism of women is taboo and to be resisted, hence his no reply. So, given all the above, what is a masculist to do who is well informed of masculist ideas, who is very much biconscious, who sees clearly that gender oppression is very much a two-way street, who feels strongly that not only should women be strongly criticised for their horrible, decades-lasting gender crimes against men, but in fact should be hated? Masculists have a hatred of gender criminal women who commit these horrible gender crimes against men and punish them so severely that these women are effectively exterminated by men, masculisted men, by being totally ignored, not even pumped and dumped. So they are forced to die slow, miserable deaths, rotting on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and spat at. So it looks as though when a biconscious masculist is confronted with a monoconscious feminist or monoconscious male feminist, there is absolutely no meeting of minds. To the monoconscious feminist, the strong criticism of women coming from the biconscious masculist is interpreted by her as just more misogyny, so she resists it, she closes her mind to it, and increases her anger at him, thus causing the biconscious masculist to see her as just another MFB, that's monoconscious feminazi bigot, as just another sexist hypocritical bigot, since he is all too aware that women oppress men far worse than vice versa, since his masculism has taught him about the horrible, decades-lasting gender crimes that women commit against men, especially the big three of manslavery, divorce rape, and forced fathering, which to anyone of either sex, once well studied, would generate a rage and hatred against women who commit such terrible gender crimes against men. So, what can biconscious masculists do to crash through this impenetrable barrier? How can a biconscious masculist force monoconscious feminists to listen to what he has to say? I think the answer to this quandary is to use the Masculist harangue, that is, especially in mixed audiences, that is where both sexes are present, to harangue the audience with passionate, angry, hateful, masculist rhetoric. So the audience is left with no doubt that they have encountered a very angry, hateful masculist who is telling them in verbally violent, hateful terms that there is a movement of men who call themselves biconscious masculists, who see women as far greater gender criminals against men than vice versa, and who are fed up with the monoconscious hypocrisy of feminists who feel they have the right to lash out at men for the ways that men oppress women, when in reality it is women who oppress men worse, and furthermore who use the femafia to block the publication of masculist, biconscious masculist ideas in the media to educate the masses on how women oppress men worse. Thus, this flyer pushes biconscious masculists to harangue their mixed audiences with a well-informed, verbally vicious, hateful diatribe, so that the audience is left with no doubt that there are men who are burning with a sense of gender injustice, given how women oppress men far worse, who feel strongly that this massive injustice against men has to stop. Similar logic applies to group discussions. Imagine a group of students on campus of both sexes, and one of the women makes a misandrist remark, feeling as a monoconscious feminist that she has every right to do so, given that she has been taught by her knowledge of feminism that men are the oppressors of women, plus her complete ignorance of how women oppress men. This misandrist feminist remark then becomes the cue for the masculist in the group to launch into his masculist harangue, telling her with real masculist anger and hatred that in fact women oppress men worse than vice versa, with women's big three of manslavery, divorce, rape, and forced fathering. He can tell her that if she bothers to learn some masculism, she will see that gender oppression is very much a two-way street, and that her monoconscious feminism is seen by him as sexist, hypocrisy, and bigotry. He can then threaten her by telling her that if she doesn't become biconscious, in brackets, by learning some masculism, before her boyfriend does, then she runs a serious risk that her now biconscious masculist boyfriend will see her monoconscious feminism as sexist, bigoted, and hypocritical, given that women oppress men worse, far worse. Her boyfriend will then become disgusted with her and dump her. The biconscious masculist can then tell her that when millions of monoconscious feminists had been dumped by their biconscious masculist boyfriends, then millions of monoconscious feminists will convert themselves into biconscious feminists, if ever they are to have a man in their lives. Once millions of such dumpings have occurred, the tipping point will be reached when it becomes collective common sense amongst female students that if they remain ignorant of masculist ideas, then that will be the kiss of death for them in terms of ever getting a man to pay any attention to them. Since once most men on campus have been masculisted, once they have swallowed the masculist virus, they will not tolerate any monoconscious feminism in a potential girlfriend, spitting in her face, yelling at her that she's an MFB, a monoconscious feminazi bigot, hated by the masculist and forced to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and utterly rejected both socially and sexually, until the tide has turned so strongly in favour of biconsciousness that only the slowest and most conservative of monoconscious feminists remain in that state, and are seen by the majority of female students as dumb and backward. Since women are herd animals, in brackets, look at women's fashion, Once this tipping point has been reached, millions of monoconscious feminists will make the switch to biconsciousness or have their faces spat at by very angry, hateful masculists who will have nothing to do with them, who will tell them to, quote, go fuck yourself, literally, since we men won't, we biconscious masculisted men won't. Women like you rot on the shelf, living a miserable life with your cats, with no man, no kids, utterly rejected by a biconscious society. If you don't bother to become biconscious and see how badly women oppress men, then you deserve your miserable fate. End quote. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. In brackets, click on the Masculist tab for 640 plus Masculist essays and their videos. See also a London Reel interview on masculism at AI will kill 1 billion people - do we create our exterminators? ? Professor Hugo de Garis - London Reel. Brackets. See the last half hour of this 2-hour interview for the Masculist segment. These flyers are available in text and video formats on Minds, BitChute, Odyssey, MGTOW.tv and X. Cheers.